Africa. Kalle udu sihai. Samayado ipatla sabo pilo. Welcome to all our listeners. Welcome to the West Africa, SADC and Reflections Since Death and Taxes episode of Ubuntunomics podcast. This week we look at the presidential visits to West Africa and the top SA update stories from the season, and the SADC SIPS program and the top Africa regional update stories from this season. With me this week is Sbu Nyati from Isakombe Assets. Hello Sbu, how are you doing this week?
No, hi Sia, I'm well, thank you, man. I can't complain. Just tired, but looking forward to the holiday season. Yeah.
And with us this week is Zama Matungandaba from M&M Legal. Hello Zama.
Hi there, Sia. Hi Sbu. How are you guys doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you doing this week, Zama?
I'm good. It's good to be back. With the team. It's been an amazing journey, and let's just end it with a bang.
Definitely. On that note, just a reminder to our listeners on whatever platform you're on, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you're enjoying this episode, hit us with a like or share it amongst your family and friends. On that note, let's get started with the SA update this week. The first story in the SA update this week is President visits to West Africa. President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa led a series of visits to Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Senegal from 30 November until 7 December. President Ramaphosa will be accompanied by a delegation of ministers and business leaders with the aim of expanding economic relations between South Africa and these West African countries. Sbu, you had a point to raise about the cooperation in terms of diplomacy, as well as our national interest and industrial policy.
South Africa is, as the industrial powerhouse of Africa, is positioning itself well, in that they're seeking to cooperate with these big players in West Africa. And now West Africa is set to explode in terms of demographics and their urbanization in the coming decades. Some say as much as half of the continent's population will be coming from West Africa. So this represents a fertile market that needs to be cultivated. Now, this official visit will center around breaking down barriers to allow for easier movement of goods and people. I expect there to be talks about easing of the visa regulations and things like fostering more investment, including setting targets, because it's no use not having targets when it comes to this investment talk. And another thing that they will have to attend to will be trade relations between South Africa and the various countries. So we see that the president has taken along with him business leaders, as you said, and various ministers. So there will be signing of agreements with various government departments, and this should see to a better collaboration between the countries as we build on existing binational relations. So the heads of government are expected to also solidify cooperation in all international multilateral institutions. Africa has to work together in institutions like the UN or the World Trade Organization. Another thing, a main thing, will be to work with our biggest partner, South Africa's biggest partner in West Africa, which is Nigeria, because 64% of trade between South Africa and West Africa is between South Africa and Nigeria, mainly in petroleum. The trade balance at the moment favors South Africa. So they'll have to come up with ways of making it a win-win type of scenario.
Definitely. And I think, the importance of the West African market is increasingly so, given that as a country, we haven't really resolved the bilateral challenges or disagreements we have with countries in East Africa, which is another growing region. East Africa and West African regions have been the top growing regions in terms of the economic recovery from COVID. But even if you look at 2020 economic response, they've really been able to absorb and continue growing despite the difficult economic environment. And so, in the absence of having strong ties in West Africa, apart from the Kenyan ties, which were strengthened with the recent bilateral visit from the Kenyan president, South Africa really needs to focus on West African region, and Nigeria is becoming increasingly important given that MTN, the local telecoms, has just recently been awarded a license which allows it to establish itself as a financial service provider in Nigeria. And given the large population and the possible penetration and expansion for fintech in West Africa, this is really a big milestone for the South African company. But I must say, from my side, one thing I'm quite proud of is the expansion away from the traditional partners. Obviously, due to colonial heritage and cultural connection, we've always had an easy entrance into the Anglophone West African countries. Here you're talking Nigeria and Ghana in particular. But I'm actually quite impressed by the expansion into Francophone West Africa, which also provides a very stable business environment for South Africa to expand into. Countries like Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal are definitely going to be on the agenda and on South Africa's map. And I think it's quite commendable that we start bridging these cultural divides, which are fictitious because they only exist because of these fissures between the European countries, France and British cultural animosities, which shouldn't actually be affecting African diplomatic and economic relations, in my view.
Yes, yeah. We really need to come up with better services, other services like you were mentioning, fintech and ICT and other goods to trade in. But this is a good move. Yeah.
I'm just, in complete agreement with everything that you're saying. And the need for us to really strengthen our ties with this country, with these countries, is goes without saying. And especially I like what you're mentioning on the aspect of fintech. I was reading a recent issue of Forbes Africa, where literally the cover was about the rise of fintechs in Nigeria. And I think that is such a booming aspect of, that is growing in Africa. And I think South Africa lags kind of behind when it comes to, that type of innovation when looking at your East African and West African countries. So I think we actually have stand a lot to benefit and gain from engaging with these countries from an economic development perspective.
And on that note, that takes us to the top 3 SA update stories from season 1. So what we've decided to do, given the finale episode, is that instead of going with the usual stories, we'll be looking at some of the stories that have created a lot of buzz and interest around our social media from our first episode since we started at the beginning of this year.
One of our top stories from season 1 comes from episode 10, which aired on Friday, the 18th of June. The name of the episode was Regulating Crypto Assets and Vaccines at Work as Conflicts Continue. So the top story that we've taken from this episode is titled SA Plans to Regulate Crypto Assets. This story was surrounding the initial public statement on crypto assets that was issued by National Treasury from South Africa in 2014, which was a joint initiative with the South African Reserve Bank, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, as well as the South African Revenue Service and the Financial Intelligence Center, and basically highlighted that this position paper was being restructured, and we had a new position paper that was being tabled. And this new position paper essentially provided a roadmap for establishing a regulatory framework through the regulation of South African crypto asset providers, and also had the purpose of basically combating money laundering as well as the financing of terrorism. So we had a lot of social media buzz around this topic, around the story. And I think it speaks to basically, the direction in which we're moving. And I was quite passionate as well about the story to say that, we really are moving in this direction. I don't think crypto is here. It is here to stay. And I think, in retrospect, we really need to be looking as a country, even just considering what we just spoke about, how we're expanding with other countries and really focusing on, like technology and, infrastructure and all those kinds of things. I mean, crypto can be used in so many different industries. Like we just mentioned, fintech, that is prime place where crypto could be used, even in property transactions, and this is not necessarily just crypto assets, but actually blockchain technology. So I think this is still going to take the world and South Africa by storm.
Actually, I raised a recent story by the South African Revenue Services, SARS, in that they're looking at ways to tax crypto assets, or at least profits from crypto assets, which is quite surprising for me, firstly, because, crypto assets are supposed to be these decentralized assets which provide privacy, and it's going to be difficult for me to see how they're going to get through voluntary disclosure, which is the only way, I guess, that they're going to get people to declare their profits for them to be taxed. And it'll be interesting to me whether the kind of tax that will be applied will be rand based or will also be payable in crypto. So that's really an interesting development. But I must admit, I think the government approach on this is going to be a bit unfair if they want to focus on taxing crypto assets and crypto profits without actually providing the financial security, given the fact that the financial security from the Reserve Bank, at least from the perspective of the previous paper, was that people are taking their own risk and that they're not covered by any of the existing financial legislation, which provides some kind of security against people's assets, such as normal banking regulation, etc. So I think if government really wants to continue down this route and tax, and I don't know how they're going to implement it, they must also consider some level of security that they will then provide crypto asset owners, which I don't know how that will be implemented either. But I guess the interesting part being that they're looking at how to tax crypto assets in South Africa. On that note, that takes us to the next top story from SBU. Privatization of Transnet SOC Limited. President Cyril Ramaphosa announced the partial privatization of Transnet State-Owned Company Limited with the establishment of Transnet National Ports Authority, the TNPA. The TNPA will be an independent subsidiary of Transnet and will be responsible for operating South African ports. Transnet will remain the owner and investor in national ports infrastructure, and Transnet has a plan to invest 100 billion rand in upgrading infrastructure over the next 5 years. This partial privatization is expected to attract private sector involvement to improve terminal operations and invest in new infrastructure. I wonder how far we've gone in terms of securing that 100 billion rand.
100 billion. There have been a lot of pledges, but there's not been any pledge on this front. So all of these projects are all bundled into one, the presidential infrastructure build program, and so that is all shrouded in mystery. There's not been clarity as to which projects are going ahead, which ones have received finance and all of that. So I don't think they've got the 100 billion rands as yet here.
Yeah. Interestingly, Transnet is also being needed in Kenya in order to help them expand with their railway network in Kenya. But we're struggling to even get things right in our own country, so we'll have to see how they actually manage that. On that note, that brings us to the last top story from episode 24, titled Economic Justice, COVID Recovery, and the Dawn of Divergence episode. The story is actually about President's visit to Msikaba Bridge, which happened on the 23rd of September when President Ramaphosa went to see the new 1.7 billion rand bridge, which is part of the N2 Wild Coast Road project. And since then, I'm not really certain how far the project has gone, but this was really something that would unlock economic recovery in the poorest parts of the Eastern Cape province.
They are talking about investment. I mean, just this week, the Shell is busy exploring in that region, in the Wild Coast, and environmental activists are up in arms. And there was also at Xolobeni, and the people of that region are also up in arms against this mining, because they still want to continue with their agricultural economy. And there is also talk about a city being built on the eastern seaboard, between Port Edward and Lusigisig. So there's a lot planned for that region, but government is not getting it right in terms of getting a buy-in from the people in the region. And you see these people opposing all of these developments, and most of these developments don't take into consideration the kind of the livelihood the people have, and how they would want to see their region being developed going forward. So it's one of those, the government wants to invest, and there are people who want to invest, but the people are not being put in at the center of development.
Sure, that's a very, very serious problem, the problem of social facilitation, which is very integral for development. And I've always wondered, how development will take place along the Wild Coast, because it's probably the most untouched or most pristine part of the country in terms of, wildlife, nature, and even just the way in which people live in that region. But definitely need to find a middle ground between the way in which development's going to expand and then bring changes, which is inevitable, and maintaining at least from an environmental perspective. Now we've got laws that are requiring certain things of government, which I think is a good step. But obviously the environment is not on its own, and it's always linked to the way in which people live. And hence the issue, without proper social facilitation, any development plans are going to be thwarted. They definitely won't succeed.
Yep.
On that note, that brings an end to the SA update this week. And just a reminder to our listeners, on whatever platform you're on, please hit the subscribe button. And if you're enjoying this episode, hit the like button and share it amongst your family and friends. On that note, that takes us to the Africa Regional Update this week. The first story in the Africa Regional Update, the SADC SIPS helps to increase chemicals production. The Support Towards Industrialization and the Productive Sectors SIPS program, run by the Southern African Development Community SADC Secretariat, is providing a €51,642 grant to Sable's Chemical Industries Limited. The Zimbabwean firm will automate its chemical packaging line with the SIPS grant. Sable Chemicals will also be commissioning a fully fledged disinfectant production line focusing on sanitizers and other personal hygiene chemicals. Sbu, you had a point to make about the SIPS program.
Yeah, this is a sizable grant for a medium-sized company. It shows that the SIPS program is carrying out its mandate. that of industrialization. The move towards automation will certainly improve production, the production capacity, and the company's output. More importantly, it will ensure diversity. And now they will move from agro-processing, which was their main competency, to chemicals. It also is noteworthy that the company's offering will also move into the consumer product space. This will result in better market penetration, because in the beginning they were only concentrated in serving government and they were going for tenders, and now they are moving into a better, secure market. So this SIPS program really is turning out to be quite something. Yeah,
Definitely. And I think it's a very good way to identify green shoots in the region. And obviously for Zimbabwe, this is also a great way to earn some foreign exchange revenues, which is something that the country can never get enough of. On that note, that brings us to the Africa Regional Update top stories from Season 1. And the first top story is from Zama.
So one of our top stories from our Africa Regional Update throughout our episodes was when we covered the 59th ECOWAS Ordinary Summit, and that was on Saturday, the 19th of June. So basically, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, held its 59th ordinary session of the Authority of Heads of State and Government on the 19th of June in Accra, Ghana. And essentially, this meeting was for them to discuss matters relating to COVID-19, regional security, economic performance, and implementation of regional integration programs. Key aspects of this meeting was that they decided to adopt the Convergence and Macroeconomic Stability Pact between ECOWAS member states, and as well as noting a roadmap for the launch of the eco-currency by 2027. I'm still at the eco-currency. I'm so excited. I really hope that they really achieve this.
I think that's one of the biggest milestones, I think, this year for the region. And they definitely have committed themselves, since this was initially just all talks and some people were doubting whether they're going to go ahead. And, with the agreement on the roadmap and being clear on the implementation deadlines, that's definitely positive. I think now what they need to do is just iron out the criteria and actual process for ascension into this new currency. And I think really brings on a new era for African regional integration, taking it beyond just the politics and the Continental Free Trade Agreement and actually into the process of policy integration as well.
100%. It's really exciting. And I would think that, it would be inspiration for other regional communities, such as SADC as well. Maybe this is something that we could potentially do on the SADC side as well. And as we've just mentioned earlier in this episode, when we made reference to President Cyril Ramaphosa's visit to, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, etc., that, as Spoo was mentioning, when he was commenting that on the agenda surely should be, free movement of people, easier, trade. And I think things like having a joint currency or a single currency could definitely improve those relations, as you're mentioning, Sia, really making it a positive, making a positive impact for regional integration.
On that note, that takes us to the next top story from Spoo.
Our story comes from episode 22. It was broadcast on the 10th of September. It has to do with the weekend coup out in Guinea. The president of the AU and the chairman of the AU Commission condemned the political and security situation out in the Republic of Guinea. And that followed a coup d'etat, which was led by Lieutenant Colonel Mamadi, who arrested the then president, Alpha Conde. So the AU had also invited the AU Peace and Security Council to examine the situation out in Guinea and to take appropriate measures. So the military junta assured economic and financial and their financial partners that activities in the country will continue as normal. Now, ECOWAS also convened on the 8th of September and agreed to call an immediate return to constitutional order. So what has happened since then is that I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, ECOWAS met again because the military junta didn't they didn't give over to a civilian to civilian rule. So what the ECOWAS has done is to call for the freezing of all the assets of the military junta and to impose travel bans on them. And they have also suspended Guinea's membership in ECOWAS. So something has to give. There have been quite a number of coups in Africa this year. I think between 5 or 6. It's become a regular occurrence in African politics. This business of deposing elected leaders through these coup d'etats. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Quite a sad situation there. And as you say, there are a number of these this year and definitely quite concerning. And since we haven't heard much, at least by way of agreements and a way forward or roadmap towards civilian rule, I'm very worried that the situation in Guinea is not going to get resolved very soon. On that note, that brings us to the last top story. This is from episode 23, which aired on Friday, 24th September, and the episode titled Economic Justice, COVID Recovery and the Dawn of Divergence. And the story is African Health Gap in Focus. Speaking on the sidelines of the 76th UN General Assembly, the AFDB President, His Excellency Akinwumi Adesina, was asserting that Africa can't really outsource its health to the rest of the world, and that it really needs to find a way to localize vaccine production, but also ramp up production from what was at the time only 3% of the population that was vaccinated, in order to meet the target of 40% by the end of the year. And I must say, in this regard, we're still dealing with slow vaccination and a lot of vaccine hesitance. But also, in addition to this, is the unequal distribution of vaccines, which has definitely been at the expense of African countries. And so we're still, even in South Africa, struggling to meet the target of 40%. But I think since then, we've seen that I think the number that has surpassed this target recently grew above 10 or 11 a couple of months back. So we still have a long way to go in order to deal with the pandemic, but also to establish resilient healthcare systems that can deal with the pressure from public healthcare perspective.
What has been interesting for me, Sia, is that we haven't seen all those deaths that were. There were all these projections about how Africa is going to get decimated, and that Africans would not. We all know would not be able to afford all of these vaccines, and it would tax their economies and all of that. Yes, the only thing that has taxed our economies has been the lockdowns. But as for deaths, there hasn't been much. There's not been much dying, and I don't know what Africans use and whatever it is that they do, they should keep doing it because, yeah, we haven't died in the numbers that we have seen in the developed world.
Yes, I definitely think that, as a continent, we've felt much more the economic impact of COVID rather than the public health impact of COVID. But that doesn't go to say that African countries really have dealt with the problem, or that we're dealing with it in any decisive manner. And my bigger concern is that even though we're not seeing the level of fatality and the level of spread, and I think that's largely due to us still having largely densely populated areas. So people still live in very sparsely populated areas. Obviously, there are some exceptions in urban areas, and there's high concentration in those areas. But by and large, we're not seeing the level of transmission that we're seeing elsewhere. But with that said, we're on the other side seeing a lot of mutation on the virus and a strengthening of the virus, and the latest mutation being the Omicron in South Africa and how that's affected Southern Africa. And my biggest concern is that without us adequately reaching the levels of vaccination needed for local population herd immunity, we're going to continuously still be dealing with the mutations, and it's going to turn into pretty much the same case as what we had with HIV, right? But the problem is, unlike HIV, which is far less transmissible or less contagious, so to speak, this pandemic is very contagious. And so we're faced with continuous isolation or continuous need for travel restrictions, whilst at the same time needing to adjust the vaccine response in order to deal with the various mutations that we're still going to deal with. My concern is that we're not going to see the end of that. And that, to me, in the prolonged economic impact of that is what concerns me more than the fact that, yes, on the public health, we've been able to avoid a lot of the fatality.
I think it is quite concerning as well. I mean, the health gap in itself, in the sense that we do need to be looking at being in the forefront of developing our own solution and responses to the pandemic. Yes, so vaccination, efforts here in South Africa, I think around 70% of the population remains unvaccinated. But, my opinion with that is exactly as you say. Now we're dealing with an Omicron variant, which was not the variant that the vaccine was essentially developed around, and so it keeps this virus keeps on mutating, and essentially, as you're saying, Sia, that we're looking at some long-term consequences of this mutation, which basically necessitates that we can't be in a position where we keep on looking at vaccines from Pfizer or from the US or from China, and just, depending on them, but we actually have to come with our African solution. To your point there, Spoo, to say that, hey, we're a different kind of a breed of our own, and even though we may not have experienced as many fatalities or whatever, perhaps we need to really develop our own vaccines that speaks to our circumstances. Otherwise, in future, we'll just go further and further into this economic downward spiral.
My worry is that also we're failing on the TRIPS waiver, and the TRIPS waiver wasn't also something that's going to resolve this overnight, right? Even if we were to get the TRIPS waiver tomorrow, we'll still need some time to set up the productive capacity. So with all these things not coming online and us not having this in our own control, is for me a much greater concern. And God forbid we get a variant that's highly transmissible and highly fatal, but also evading the existing vaccines. Will be definitely locked out from the rest of the world.
100%.
On that note, that brings an end to the Africa Regional Update this week. And that brings us to the numbers game.
Yeah, bro.
Final numbers game for 2021, and the number is Yeah, I don't know if Smooth's going to get this one. I hope he doesn't. But the number for this week is 660,000. You want to give it a go, Zama?
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm really trying to knock Spoo off of his throne with this one. I'm really trying. Okay, so 660,000 sounds to me like number of people displaced. So it sounds to me like people when I think about it, really, but not a population. So I thought about displacement, because we've experienced a
Yeah.
lot of conflict on the continent. So I don't know, something came to me around displacement and people.
Very good guess. Very good guess. What we usually say is close but no cigar.
But no cigar. Oh my gosh. When is my time?
Close but no cigar. All right, Smooth, you want to give it a go?
Now, I'll try not to get it.
Ah, look at
I'll
you.
try not to be a spoil. I won't spoil it for you.
Don't
Okay,
be
let me
spoiled
say
sport.
660,000 young people will be joining the unemployment lines. That will be the matriculants and youngsters joining the unemployment
Wow.
lines.
Actually, I don't know. You kind of half got it. This is, yeah, very, very
No,
good guess, but very, very close. Like
I didn't want to spoil it. I didn't
a
want to
hair's
spoil
width close. I think you actually knew, but decided not to give it a go. You're a good sport. Anyway, so the number is 660,000 jobs lost in the third quarter of 2021. So the quarterly labor force survey QLFS for the third quarter 2021 shows that the number of employed persons decreased by 660,000 to 14.3 million. As a result, the official unemployment rate has increased to 34.9% in the third quarter from 34.4%, which is the highest level since the QLFS started in 2008. The broad unemployment rate increased to 46.6% in the third quarter from 44.4%. There you have it, folks. We lost just under 700,000 jobs in the past quarter. That's very, very, very concerning. And I think that's almost like 1 million families that won't have any income at this time of the year. And in an economic climate as we're in, where there's so much uncertainty, it's very, very concerning.
It's bad. It's bad.
Oh, this-
They will blame COVID, but we know that the structure of the South African economy needs attention. We can't grow. We can't. Even if we have growth, it will be jobless growth. We need to change how things are, and they keep on talking about changing how things are, but no one wants to do what is right. I mean, they keep skirting around the problem. They'll say, no, we'll do this, that, and the other, but it never comes in. I mean, they talked about a stimulus. I mean, just recently, the president announced that they'll pump in 11 billion rand over the medium term for the president's youth employment initiative, but nothing ever comes out of it. No, anyway.
I remember a couple of
frustrating.
years back when the president decided to remove all job requirements on entry-level government posts with the aim of creating more jobs for young people. But it seems as though it's not enough, whatever we're creating on the public side. And my biggest concern also with these things is they've literally just become the one area where you just keep getting shocked every couple of months. And we keep getting shocks every couple of months. And I worry that sooner or later this problem is going to pour out onto our streets and it's going to be too far to actually resolve. I think at this point, some economists are actually speculating that South Africa is beyond saving, given that actual fact that we've got 50% unemployment rate, so half of the labor force is unemployed. So, I wonder if it's only economic policy that will save us. And I'm very, very worried about this.
Oh, no.
And when you speak to people from the region and the rest of the continent, they tell you that actually what's happening in South Africa is precisely what happened in Zimbabwe just before the 2008 crisis that they had. And that unlike Zimbabwe, where it happened very rapidly, I think from like 2003 to 2008, things deteriorated rapidly. The bigger economy is almost like a slow giant falling slowly. But I worry that unless we arrest the situation immediately, we're going to reach the point of no return soon enough.
We had the July civil unrest, and they keep on saying, "No, it was instigators, it was whatnot." But we all saw it. Kids with trolleys full of goodies. We saw it. Mamas, daddies. It was just the poor were out there. In fact, including the middle classes were out there looting. We've seen it. We've seen the beginnings of it.
Yeah.
Very, very concerning.
Yeah, definitely. This is so concerning. I think just as you're saying, Spoos here, for me, how I look at it is that definitely we're going down a path that we will almost be, unable to recover from. And I think for us as a country, instead of focusing on, sort of foreign direct investment necessarily, I think we really need to have more of a protectionist kind of policy, look more inward, and actually embark on more of a public-private sort of partnership on an aggressive level. We have a lot of top-tier companies that operate from South Africa. I mean, have a look at the JSE, and you can see how much money is floating around on the daily in the stock market. And these are companies that operate directly from South Africa. So, I mean, if the government in partnership with the private sector, this is what we're looking at. This is where we can see some development happening, in my humble opinion. As you've said, Sia, that there's only so much that we can do from a government side perspective, jobs from the government, but really we need to look at private companies who are quite profit driven to see how we can create more jobs, expand the economy, and basically taking it from the inward as a country, focusing on what we have inward and then taking it out to the world. This is my view.
Look, I think as we wrap up, we'll probably do some reflection on what we expect for next year. But my last point on my side from this on the story is, I think from an economic policy point of view, the business as usual approach, which is often export driven growth. Let's get FDI. Let's try and get our export sector going because we've got low aggregate demand domestically, etc., is not going to work. The whole world is dealing with the problem of low aggregate demand. The whole world is dealing with the problem of youth unemployment. It's not just something that's unique to South Africa. And so what we need to do is probably have a much more inward-looking approach in our economic policy, approach that tries to resolve the problems and deals with them at a structural level. Issues such as housing could easily create mass employment and also improve the living conditions of South Africans. There's definitely going to be a lot more investment going into our energy sources as we transition from carbon towards renewable energy. Fortunately, we're a country that has a very good road network, so we don't necessarily need to invest there. We don't necessarily need to be investing in a lot of much more public infrastructure because we already have that. But what we need to focus on is, how do we improve the living conditions of South Africans, and how do we improve and deal with inequality as a country? I think if any policymaker is not obsessed with these two problems going forward, obviously the last being the environmental issue and the transition, you're actually just wasting your time. You can't be focusing here on trying to establish a new SEZ that's going to export goods to where? Because at the same time, globally, you've got the EU trying to establish its own local fund to check the dominance of China's expansion towards East Europe. And that, at the same time, globally, you've got the US-China trade, spat that's taken place. And so the traditional way of dealing global economy is not going to be the way forward on this one. I think we have to look internally. We have to look at the continent, obviously. And it starts with internally resolving the internal problems and the legacy that we have of various issues, not just apartheid. Now we're dealing with other economic crises that have taken on top of that, that have worsened the situation. But I think we need to have an inward-looking economic policy that is focused more strongly on improving living conditions, but also dealing with inequality. And then on that note, I want to hear what you guys think we can expect for next year as a country and also as a continent.
South Africa, the state needs to invest in capital growth, in investing. I mean, what's happening in South Africa?
Sorry, what do you mean by capital growth? Do you mind explaining that a little bit?
I mean, investing in those assets that will grow the economy. We have been talking about this year, about ports.
Okay,
We've been talking about ports. We have been talking about the rail network. We have been talking about ESCOM. Those things, those big things that drive the economy. So the state is actually on an investment boycott. So that's what needs to change.
So what do you think we can expect next year as a country and also as a continent?
What we can expect is that there will be more expenditure on the government side. I mean, the ANC will want to bail itself out of the mess that they are in, because the voters are starting to reject them. So something will happen on that. They'll either continue with these 350 rands that they give people, or have some sort of a BIG, which is the basic income grant arrangement going. Another thing that will happen is that privatization will go full steam, and there will be that 131 billion rands from the EU for transitioning will come in, and that will be used to sort of like buy the voters' confidence back. I mean, what is happening is that not only are people is the cost of living going up, but people have lost hope and faith in the government. So the main thing that will be happening is that buying back that hope and faith and trust in government, in the ANC.
Yeah. Well, I think brilliant analysis, and I agree with you 100%. I want to say that I would only add that I also expect there to be a lot of dysfunction at a municipal level as people also grapple with dealing with municipal level problems, which I think are largely an issue of planning, and dealing with the sort of network problems that you've raised, issues of electricity, etc., and also major infrastructure problems are also going to be on the rise, particularly on water, because unlike electricity, which has a central point of contact, focus on ESCOM, whatever you're doing, the interventions are focused around ESCOM. Water has multiple points, and there's also a lot of finger waving when it comes to water infrastructure. So I expect that to be a major issue of concern for the country. I also don't know how the issue of the permits in legislation in terms of the new Home Affairs legislation and how it affects Zimbabweans' permits will be resolved as a country. As you know, a lot of Zimbabweans are currently living in South Africa due to the economic crisis in their country, and are living in the country under specific permits which allow them to be here due to the sanctions and the economic challenges faced in Zimbabwe. Now, obviously, government doing a revamp and ending the extended contract legislation that the Zimbabweans get their permits under will actually put a lot of pressure and force a lot of Zimbabweans back to Zimbabwe. But without having resolved the economic crisis in Zimbabwe, I'm not sure how we'll keep those Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe. And so I do expect some pressures, at least in terms of public protests, as also the politics is likely to degrade into, xenophobic pointing of finger and attacks. And I worry that, that is going to turn our local government crises and worsen them. And I definitely think that on the continent, we'll still be dealing with the issue of political insecurity on the back of all these coups d'etats that are taking place. And the existing conflicts are expected to probably worsen, such as Ethiopia, which I don't think will be resolved very urgently. And I don't see much by way of political stability on the whole continent. And I worry that with that and the economic issues coming out of COVID, we're going to struggle a bit with the recovery, both from a social point of view, but also economically speaking. Zama, what are your thoughts?
100% in agreement with you guys. So on Spoo's point, completely agreed that the way the government will be trying to buy back the population. But then what I would like to add to that is essentially what I see happening is, unlike my usual optimistic self, my usual politic is very optimistic, but this time I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I think leading up to the national elections in South Africa, we're going to see quite a degradation of the South African way of living, whether it be, through, as Sia has mentioned, municipal, at a local government level, we're going to see a lot of problems, lack of service delivery. When we look in general, I think we're going to see, already we're seeing unemployment rates climb up. We're going to see an increase in crime as a result as well. So we're going to be basically, as Sia has also mentioned, strike action, so we're going to really see a lot of instability in this country moving forward. And no matter how the government tries to buy us back with grants or whatever programs they do, I do not have faith that they will be able to recover us in the time that they have left until the national elections. So I think it's going to really get worse until it gets better. So the coalition governments that we're currently seeing in a local government perspective, or from, they will actually only get stronger, but their strength will mainly come from the fact that nationally the government will be failing. And then from an African perspective, from a continental perspective, I see that there will be definitely more instability with the conflicts. But my outlook on Africa continentally is that we will actually see, even though South Africa, in my opinion, is still going to go down, what we'll see is that other African countries will actually rise to the top and will actually be, competing quite heavily with countries like such as South Africa that have been in the top but are basically losing their position. So we're going to see as much as there's instability and from a security perspective and a political perspective in these African countries, I think there are enough African countries, as Sia has alluded to earlier, that are booming economically, that are actually still thriving through the COVID-19 times, that are actually still growing, that we're going to see next year actually a great, Africa actually booming economically, not from the perspective of South Africa, but rather from other countries that historically have not been doing well.
Yes. And I think on that note, my last point would be to say I 100% agree with you, Zama. And the big irony I've noticed also is that, Africa is a very resilient place. And I think during this pandemic, what we've seen economically even, and also from a public health point of view, is the resilience of the continent, such that despite this global pandemic that's, killed over 5 million people globally, we've seen the least number of fatalities. And if you look at the projections for economic performance in 2021, African countries have by and large been able to absorb the shock firstly in 2020, but in 2021, a lot more countries are actually on a recovery path and a growth path. And that although South Africa is struggling with finding its own recovery and dealing with its problems, the rest of the continent, being a resilient continent, is taking this crisis and shining at this moment. And I think that to me is the only sort of silver lining that gives me hope about not just ourselves as a country, but the continent as a whole. On that note, that brings an end to our episode this week.